everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Before I start talking about my article entitled Positive Liberty and Black Female Subjectivity in Toni Morrison's novel Sula, I want to highlight some of the general debates that characterized the way I view the novel in a different way. The novel revolves around two main characters, Sula and Nell, and most critics have argued that even though Sula could be seen as the main character because first the novel holds her name, second because she is a main factor in the narrative, they believe that Nell is a traditional hero because she's the one who gets mature over time, and she's the one that survives until the end of the narrative. And my own argument is that even though Sula dies way before the narrative ends, like 50 pages before we finish the novel, she actually is a traditional hero because she has an impact that persists throughout the whole narrative until the last page of the novel. So, and I use the word hero instead of heroine because my work is all about deconstructing the binary opposites of traditional normative constructions, gender, as well as race. So I use hero instead of heroine. Some of the things that I want to touch upon today is first, the closed systems and preset traditions in the novel, the objectification of Black women, and what I want to reach by the end is how female subjectivity through the lens of postmodern theory is attainable, and what possibilities of such positive Black female subjectivity the novel is offering for us. So the novel begins with the history of the bottom community in 1803, way before we are introduced to Sula's story, and then it ends 25 years after Sula's death. And in the middle, we are introduced to fragments of the past in which we meet the two characters and their relationship, their position within their society, and the complexities that are going on. And structured in that way, the novel brings readers to this, it becomes an act of reflection, and it invites the readers to rethink and re-examine these characters as we see them evolve in the narrative. In the community of the bottom, problematic individuals exist within human-made constructions that objectify the female characters in the novel and restrict them not only from their gender role but also from their skin color in which they are entrapped. We have a lot of female characters, but all of them suffer a different kind of objectification, and under these objectified women, we meet Sula and Nell as little girls. And here where Toni Morrison introduces us to this term of meanness, a shared sense of meanness. And this expression, we firstly encounter it with Nell as a child, as she goes to her mother to a trip to the south, and in that trip she contemplates about herself, her mother, her life, and I hear write a quote from her. She looked for a long time, and suddenly a shiver ran through her. "I am me," she whispered. "Me, Nell." Nell didn't know quite what she meant, but on the other hand, she knew exactly what she meant. "I am me. I'm not their daughter. I'm not Nell. I am me, me." Each time she said the word me, there was a gathering in her, like power, like joy, like fear. So in that moment, Nell experiences a kind of separation from her mother. And to give you a little background of her mother is, of course, a Black woman who lives according to the norms of the bottom society. And in her life, she aspires to live up to as a white woman. She's very social. She goes to church. She arranges social events, and she tries to reconstruct herself as a white woman, even though she's Black. And of course, she fails to do this because of her race, and as well as gender, as a female and as a black woman. Over time, Nell completely, going back to this meanness sense, with Sula, as she grows this friendship with Sula, Sula helps her strengthening this sense. With Sula, she feels more like herself, because Sula is a little bit liberated, even though they're children, but it helps her accomplish this, and we can see this more as they grow up. But over time, Nell completely loses her sense of meanness and therefore becomes unable to live a liberating sense of individuality. She's manipulated by her mother. She gets married without passion. She falls into her role as a mother, as a wife, and ultimately grows a limited consciousness. And while the influence that Nell receives strips her sense of meanness away from her, Sula's experiences sharpens her individuality. So, different from other female characters in the novel, Sula is the only one who manages to live solely according to her desires. She also goes beyond her mother by overcoming the preset identities of the bottom. Her character is embody the postmodernist concept as a contradictory phenomena, described by Linda Hutchin in her book A Poetics of Postmodernism. So it is this book that I structure my whole article around, the idea of postmodernism as a contradictory phenomena, one that uses and abuses, installs, as well as subverts the very concept that it challenges. So it's all about submitting, but subverting at the same time without really challenging this concept, like without really aspiring to prove it wrong or prove it negative. This contradiction is initiated as an act of decentralizing or denaturalizing the conventional and cultural discourse within which we live. Sula embodies this idea through her behaviors as well as the way she views things. For example, instead of inheriting her mother and grandmother's men love, she grows in a love for her own naked self. And also, but at the same time, she grows this sense of individuality, but also acknowledges the fact that she cannot escape objectification throughout the narrative. One example is Ajax, a boy that she meets when she's 12 years old, and then she meets later as an adult and becomes his girlfriend. As a child, she passes by and he says an expression saying pig meat. And at that time, she takes it as an act of flirting. But as an adult, she reflects upon this moment as a child, and she sees how she is, like any other woman in the novel, vulnerable to this gender rules and social structures that she cannot escape as a woman. And that's where the contradictionist comes in Sula's character. And also among the characters of postmodernism is enacting a process of rethinking some standard judgments. Postmodernism questions centralized, totalized, hierarchized, closed systems. Questions but does not destroy. It acknowledges the human urge to make order while pointing out that the orders we create are just that, human constructs, not natural nor given entities, and such problematic or contradicted attributes of postmodernism are not to be resolved, but held in tension. And that's what Sula is actually representing in her problematic relationship with her mother, her friends, and her community at large. That is a conflict that never gets resolved. Through her complexity and contradictiness, the novel questions the binaries that conceal hierarchies of self and other, going by that beyond the binary opposition of within and without the center. This position gives or opens up more possibilities. And here I quote an interesting passage from Hutchins' theorizing of postmodernism. She writes, "There have been liberating effects of moving away from the language of alienation, otherness, to that of decentering or difference, because the center used to function as the pivot between binary opposites which always privileged one half, white, black, male, female, self, other, intellect, body, west, east, objectivity, and subjectivity. But if the center is seen as a construct, a fiction, not a fixed and unchangeable reality, then you and also of multiplicity and difference opens up new possibilities." So two conclusions come out. One is blurring the lines that humans create between the center, what is centered and what is decentered, the normal and what is understood to be or supposedly be abnormal. And the other conclusion is undermining the constructed notions of good and bad that get created by social construction. And as I highlight some specific examples of how Sula epitomizes this, I am going to show how her liberty is achieved and what makes it positive. To begin with, through Sula's eyes, Morrison shows us how the marginalized isn't evil, something that the community in the novel is unable to comprehend. And one example is the character of Shadrach. Shadrach is a man who goes to war and comes back with a shattered identity. And because he becomes different, then the community grows this sense of him as evil or othered. And he becomes cast away. But through Sula's eye, we get to see how he is not evil. He's a human being who's not as bad as the community have cultivated about him. So by doing that, she undermines the constructed notions of good and bad, and becomes crucial to this understanding. The second point is Sula's ability to overcome the binaries, offering difference away from socially constructed gender roles, allows Sula to achieve her autonomy. One way through which Sula's positive liberty is accomplished is her own unique way of viewing herself as parallel to the man. So at the beginning I said she's acknowledging the fact that she is being objectified and she can't do anything about that, but the way she views herself, she sees herself as a human being rather than a woman or a black woman. In her last conversation with Nil, Sula replies to her friend's accusations of being a woman and a black woman who really can't do anything about that by pointing out the need for breaking from the social categorization of male and female, black and white, favoring by that her own sense of meanness. So she says, "You say I'm a woman and colored. Ain't that the same as being a man?" So she's doing this questioning and allowing us as readers to also see this happening. By her reply, Sula ignores the distinction made by Nil regarding gender. She refuses to see the difference between a man and a woman. Moreover, the experimental life that Sula lives does not only offer her a true way of living in which she lives transparent with her own self, but also infuses Nil with new and positive ways of thinking that only exists as a result of Sula. So even though Sula, we don't get to know Sula in a very intimately. I mean, we don't get to access her inside mind all the time, but we get to see how she functions throughout other characters like Nil. Nil, as an adult, goes through some miserable experiences, and every time she contemplates about her life, Sula pops up in her mind. And she keeps remembering Sula's words, Sula's behaviors. Sula said this, Sula said that. And there is a moment in the novel where Sula's influence actually helps Nil in externalizing her negative emotions and help Nil also in dealing with these emotions. So here is where I read Sula's liberty and radicalness, in other words, as a positive thing in the novel. So she's powerful enough that she evokes change in Nell's character. Moving on to Sula's character, as raising more questions than giving answers, her existing, however, offers new possibilities for living free from the conventions and constructed norms that should not necessarily shape people's lives. Morrison's representation of Sula manifests as a radical but positive force that while allowing Sula female subjectivity, ultimately brings Nell to a moment of awakening that occurs when she's 50 years old. Moreover, such representation allows a space for abolishing the constructed notions of living by which people are limited to their roles and racial identities. Sula's last words before she dies are, "Oh, they'll love me all right. It'll take time, but they'll love me. After all, old women have lain with the teenagers, with all the young girls have slept with their old drunken uncles, when all the white women kiss all the black, then there'll be a little love left over for me, and I know just what it will feel like." So she says these words in reply to Nell's accusations of Sula. Nell tells Sula that, "Do you realize that you're gonna die alone? And no one really loves you?" And she said, "They will love me all right." And this is evident as we see the novel by the end of the novel, when Nell is 50 years old after 25 years of Sula's death, and where Nell eventually realizes that Sula was right in her autonomous living and individuality, which she never lived to celebrate with another. At the end of the novel, Nell visits the cemetery for Eva Peace's funeral, and she remembers Sula, and suddenly realizes that it was Sula whom she was missing, or in other words, the part of her that she used to share with Sula but never sustained. Her meanness. Nell's remembrance of her past with Sula, as she recalls, "We were girls together," is an epiphany in which she realizes that her life could have been lived free from whatever restricts her from being intimate with herself. By the end, the last words that Nell says is "girl, girl, 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 girl," and this is like 3 words, and then three words of girl, and then 3 girls without a space. And this is part of Morrison representing this as what I call a cry or a scream or an agony from the inside. And I read this as an act of bringing her back to the sense of individuality and transparency with the self that she used to have before she conformed to the social norms and values.